We will present learning style and culture, a preliminary investigation using a top-down approach. This study was done by Yoshitaka Yamazaki and Michiko Toyama from Bunkyo University in Tokyo. The contents of this presentation. First of all, we will present the purpose of these studies. Then, we will explain about the theoretical views of this study. Then, why this study is important. Then we'll present the methods, result, and discussion. The purpose of this study. We will preliminarily attempt to use a top-down approach about relationships between learning style and country's culture. For this purpose, we are using Kolb's learning style and Hofstede's cultural dimensions. We will explain about Kolb's learning style later. We will explain about Kolb's experiential learning theory. This is a picture of his model. Kolb's experiential learning theory was developed and based on several famous researchers. And this theory is very unique because individual experience plays a very important role in learning. This model has four learning modes of concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. The feeling mode requires using feeling and sensing, makes tacit knowledge. Thinking mode requires logic concept and make explicit knowledge. Reflecting mode requires watching and listening and transform tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge. Then finally, acting mode requires taking action to test explicit knowledge and transform explicit knowledge to tacit knowledge. And feeling mode is opposite to thinking mode. And reflecting mode is opposite to acting mode. According to Kolb's theory, people tend to prefer to use one learning mode to the other. It depends on academic measure, job requirements, and personality and culture. This study focuses on relationship between learning style modes and country's culture. This slide is about relationships between Kolb's learning style modes and Hofstede's cultural dimensions based on theoretical views. As we explained previously, Kolb's learning model has four learning modes: concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. Concrete experience mode is theoretically related to collectivism, while abstract conceptualization is related to individualism, and reflective observation is related to collectivism, and strong uncertainty avoidance. And finally, active experimentation is related to individualism and weak uncertainty avoidance. This is a theoretical view. Why is this study important? There are many cross-national studies on relationships between learning style and countries. When we look at the cross-cultural studies, relationships between learning style and country's culture are relatively fewer than cross-national studies. And we believe all of these studies were done by a bottom-up approach. They typically compared several countries and learning style, no matter cross-national or cross-cultural studies. And to our best knowledge, there is no top-down approach about cross-cultural studies. So we think this study is meaningful if we use the top-down approach in order to examine relationships between learning style and culture. We will explain about top-down approach in the next slide. And we'd like to explain about top-down approach. McLean and his colleagues offered a top-down approach to compare scores of psychological variables across countries and culture. Their psychological variables are big five personality traits. They said that research can make use of numerous data available and accessible through internet. And they are collecting those data. Researchers compared aggregated scores across culture and countries as culture level analysis. There are several past studies that has been done by top-down approach and already published. For example, McLean and his colleagues examined relationships between big five personality traits and hostess culture dimension by using top-down approach. As another, Barcelo conducted a top-down approach to investigate relationship between national personality traits and country rhythm types. Now we move to methods, data collection. In order to collect data, we use two databases, ProQuest and Scopus. Then, to obtain learning style papers called learning style papers, we entered the words of learning style inventory. The learning style inventory was designed to examine individual learning style based on Kolb's experiential learning theory. We provided the following three conditions about the paper publication. The paper should be scholarly journal, and it should be written in English. And finally, papers were published from past to the year of 2021, which is no time limit. Here is the method we used. This slide is about results of data collection. In terms of initial search, we got 1202 from ProQuest and 2443 from the Scopus. There are 492 of the duplicates. So we subtracted 492 from the total. As an initial search, we obtained 3153. This was the base to start. Then, as it's important to obtain Kolb's learning style papers, we conducted abstract check. This is the read abstract of each paper. So as a result, we got 514 papers relevant to Kolb's learning style variables. Then we conducted a further investigation in order to find out which papers presented Kolb's learning style variables with statistical scores. For this phase, we need to read a full paper. Then we randomly selected 10% of 514 papers, resulted in 63 papers. These papers were required to check a full paper. As we presented the previous slides, there were 63 papers randomly selected for a full paper check. Then we did not obtain 11 papers, so we read 52 papers carefully. There were 10 papers with Kolb's learning style variables and their statistical scores. But 3 papers of them used heterogeneous samples that are thought to affect learning style very strongly. One paper used the industry's participants, and 2 papers used engineering measures. So we eliminated these 3 papers. Finally, we found 7 papers to analyze the relationship between learning style and culture. This slide is about results of data collection. Then here is a publication year, country, Canada, Japan, US, Greece, Indonesia, Australia, and United Kingdom. And here is a sample size. Then all of our samples here are based on school, higher educations. Then here is our majors and courses. Then this column is about Kolb's learning style variables. ACCE means thinking, feeling modes. Then ARO means acting versus reflecting mode. These scores are important to be analyzed. Then this is about Hofstede's cultural dimensions. We used four cultural dimensions: individualism versus collectivism, power distance, uncertainty avoidance, and masculinity and femininity. And these scores are aligned with Canada and Japan, US, Greece, Indonesia, Australia, and UK. So we try to analyze the relationship between Kolb's learning variables and Hofstede's cultural dimensions. This is about the result of correlation analysis between Kolb's two learning style variables and Hofstede's four cultural dimensions. Here is a learning style variable about more thinking over feeling and more acting over reflecting. You can see a significant positive correlation between more thinking over feeling and individualism versus collectivism here, and more acting over reflecting and individualism versus collectivism here. There are three negative correlations between them. More thinking over feeling and power distance here, and more acting over reflecting and power distance here. There is another negative correlation between more thinking over feeling and uncertainty avoidance. The rest of correlation between them are not significant. For example, more thinking over feeling and masculinity versus femininity, and more acting over reflecting and uncertainty avoidance, and masculinity versus femininity. Those three relationships between them are not significant. This is the result of correlation analysis. This slide is about the result summary. There were significant relationships between more thinking over feeling and the three cultural values: individualism, power distance, and uncertainty avoidance. And there are significant relationships between more acting over reflecting and two cultural values: individualism and power distance. This is the summary. Now we move to discussion. According to the correlation results, if people prefer to learn by more thinking over feeling, number 1, they are inclined towards individualism. Number 2, they are inclined towards weak uncertainty avoidance. These two results are supported by the past studies. And number 3, they are inclined towards low power distance. In terms of the number 3 here, because there is a strong association between individualism, collectivism, and power distance, according to Hofstede, this learning style variable of more thinking over feeling may be affected by both values. This slide is about another discussion. Similarly, people prefer to learn by more acting over reflecting. Number 1, they are inclined towards individualism. This result is supported by the past studies. Number 2, they are inclined towards low power distance. Again, Due to a strong association between individualism, collectivism, and power distance, this learning style variable may be affected by both cultural values. Thank you very much for watching and listening.